Hi, everybody. We're talking about the marketing plan and author platform section of your book proposal. And yeah, just to be really clear about that, I'm not asking you as part of this class to, you know, make a social media page or start a newsletter or that's so too much for us to take on. But you can, in your in your free time, in your spare time, that's what writers are doing now. They're going on sites like Substack, or they're starting YouTube channels, or they're book talk, getting on TikTok and talking about their writing with other writers. And there's, or X or Twitter or Blue Sky, there's like spaces where people talk about writing. And um, in a nonfiction book proposal, increasingly that's becoming the way to get that sale, that contract to actually sell your book in the long run, is like you have to demonstrate some kind of audience. Now, personally, I find that really difficult. It's hard to kind of sell yourself and sell your, like, I want to be a writer, I don't want to be a marketer. And so it's a tough thing. And so, for the purposes of this class, you might have to think like, well, what are the places, what are the audiences that you can reach? Maybe develop some concrete plan for the future. Could you start a newsletter? Yeah, you don't have to for this class. I'm not asking anybody to do that. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of lift. Sure. Could you sign up for an online course in marketing to kind of work on your marketing chops? Totally. Yeah. I mean, you can start thinking about things, again, not required for the class, but so how do you write a marketing plan if you don't exactly have a marketing plan yet? Well, you can start saying things like that, like, oh, I intend to, draw on my experience as an intern. Maybe you learned a little bit about publishing industry in a different class. You have some connections in a professional network. Just kind of start mapping some of those ideas out about where would your book actually go, and who would actually read it. Maybe you plan on, you kind of go into the hypothetical. If my book were published, what would you do with it? How would you actually get people to read it? Um, could you do some book signing events at a local bookstore? There's a really, I don't know, we're online class, so we don't all live in in the Twin Ports area, but there's a really nice new local bookstore in Superior. You know, plan some things out like that, and just, I mean, you don't actually have to do that for the class, but for the purpose of the book proposal, just kind of get some ideas about what you might do hypothetically if your book were published. Build out some a social media following, a newsletter. Could you plan on doing a podcast? Go reaching out, and reaching out to some podcasts and become a guest, or yeah, all those sorts of things. And again, bearing in mind, we're not marketers necessarily here. I have something of a marketing background, and I find all this really difficult. But yeah, so this is kind of open ended here. Just thinking, if your book did get published, where would it go? Who would you talk to? What are the communities that would be interested in it? What do those audiences look like? And what are some strategies for reaching those people to get your book in their hands? Now, traditionally, a publisher does a lot of that. A publisher actually puts the book in bookstores, they distribute the book, they help you line up some opportunities for speaking, but also, and increasingly into the future, especially with smaller publishers and even medium sized publishers, uh, they expect the author to do some of the groundwork, to do some of the outreach, to take the initiative to get that book into places. So you really want to try to demonstrate some kind of sales potential in this section. the people you know, the communities you're involved in, quantitative information about populations, about membership rates, about social media following, um, even like, we can be a bit hypothetical here. Like, if my book about farming, were published, I would reach out to the top three farming podcasts on YouTube to secure a guest appearance. And then you could quantify that by saying, if we look at the top three farming channels on YouTube, they have a combined viewership of 7.3 million viewers. So we could potentially reach a huge audience through this type of social media influencer marketing strategy. That's enough for this section, right? Just we can remain in the land of the hypothetical at this point because, one, the book is not published yet. It's not even written yet, so we don't know what will happen. But we can make some like quantitative guesses about audience sizes and readership and what you would actually do with the book once it's published. So it's kind of fun to think about, flex those marketing muscles a little bit and develop this section in a clear and realistic way of how could you really maximize, reaching the most amount of people possible, but also not going overboard. Is your book about Romanian violins really going to sell 10 million copies? It's like that's a hard, be realistic. Like maybe there are 10,000 people who go to the annual workshop on violin luthiering, making violins in Tennessee or something, and that's like one potential audience of 10,000 people. That starts to look, I mean, actually, there's probably like, I don't know how many people go to violin making workshops. Maybe it's like 800 people, but that's 800 people. And then maybe there are 3,000 people who go to the annual folk history conference, and that's 3,000 more people, right? And maybe there's 1,500 people who follow a channel about Romanian history on YouTube, and that's 1,500 more people you could reach. So you can get kind of realistic, specific, demographic, quantitative about the very real audience of who might read your book. The very real people who live in communities and are interested in your subject and participate in those communities and might be interested in reading your book, and how would you reach them and how would you share it with them. And that starts to look like a marketing plan, especially when you quantify it, especially when you look at actual populations, numbers of those demographics. This starts to look pretty realistic. So take care. And in fact, it can be realistic. That's the start of your marketing plan. All right.